The human cost of the war in monetarily. The war in Afghanistan has an estimated price tag of at least $2 trillion. Help us make sense of how much that money is and how worthwhile that money was in light of how the war ended.
$2 trillion. That is a staggering amount. That is huge. I mean, Afghanistan is a country with a GDP of $20 billion as of 2020. And its GDP, by the way, hasn't grown in the past 10 years. The GDP of Afghanistan remained flat from 2012 until now. So put the $2 trillion U.S. costs in perspective. $2 trillion. If that amount were a standalone economy, that country or region would rank the 9th in the world, above Canada or Italy. So I think on top of the financial costs, the strategic costs and the reputational costs of America are even bigger. You know, I think this should mark an end of America's wishful thinking, believing that, you know, the West can simply impose its way of life, its political structure, its value system, its ideology onto an alien culture, an alien society, which derives from a totally different social, economic, and political dynamic.
Well, I do want to talk to you about America's defense budget here. America being the richest country in the world, #1 economy, it also spends more on defense than the next 7 countries combined. We talk a lot about taking an opportunity to reflect on the war. And many say America should also reflect on its military interventionist nature, policies, and strategies. What do you make of that?
Well, you know what, Zhongshi? I think there are no winners but losers in wars. And if there were any winners this time around, that would be the U.S. military-industrial complex. You know, that organization or institution, rather, cashed out on the Pentagon's big checks of the war in Afghanistan, $2 trillion, as you have just mentioned. That is a huge amount. That accounts for 10% of America's all-federal budget and 50% of America's discretionary spending. So really, this should remind us that there are limits to American interventionism. This is a country that really swings from isolationism to interventionism. You know, we talk about Vietnam, and then later on, the president realizes that there's too much intervention, and they withdraw from, you know, the rest of the world. And then later on, when Ronald Reagan realizes that, you know, we're being too weak, he started the START war. A program with the Soviet Union, and then Bill Clinton started another round of withdrawal, but then again George Bush 41 started another round of interventionism. So we've seen a pattern where U.S. foreign policy making swings, it's like a pendulum, swings from isolationism to interventionism. And if Afghanistan reminds us and taught us anything, that is U.S. interventionism has its limits.
Let's also bring in current affairs commentator Einar Tangen joining us over Skype from Shanghai. Einar, let's talk about the wider costs here. How has the war in Afghanistan and the abrupt exit affected the U.S.'s credibility worldwide?
Well, the U.S. faces a crisis not only in terms of its internal credibility, but also in terms of international responsibility. This has been a fiasco, 20 years, and all the numbers that you said in terms of dead, wounded, money, displaced people, in a country that is now broken and broke. Hard to figure out how this can be justified without some sort of reflection. But remember, I mean, the United States, after World War II, thought of itself as the policeman of the world, that it was the only thing standing between the world and another possible world war. Now it seems that ability to use bombs and bullets to purchase democracy is nothing but a pipe dream. It may have worked in Germany, Japan, and Austria, but those were nations. Creating nations out of broken pieces by force has not worked.
Yeah, something Wang Guan said just now really reminds me about the winner and loser theory here. No one really is the winner in a war. And if we look at who has really paid the ultimate price here, it's not just the U.S. paying the price for the war. It's also the Afghan people facing food insecurity, an economy in tatters, and now an uncertain future with Taliban ruling. Where do these costs figure in the equation
Well, unfortunately, they're going to be left in the dust. And, Americans will move out. There'll be a lot of finger pointing, as usual. It's not America's fault. It's somebody else's. There won't be any soul searching, and that's the problem. The endless tragedies that have been happening for the last 20 years cannot be undone. The question is, will this be a moment where the U.S. pauses, reflects, and says, this isn't working? We need to realize that there are sovereign nations who have different paths, and that this is a multipolar world where we cannot just enforce the will. American exceptionalism should be dead. It should be buried and put away forever. Unfortunately, the current administration in Washington does not seem to be reflecting. They just seem